here we are. As mentioned in the last episode, I thought it'd be good to take a break from the welding. It's driving me a bit crazy. It's not the most rewarding task in the world, welding up an old Italian car. You know, when most of the metal is sub 1mm, so it's all very delicate work. Well, most of it is anyway. So here we are with the 3 litre fuel tank. So obviously this got removed, well I say obviously, a while back this got removed for some welding in the boot. It didn't have any fuel in it anyway, but you know, tank out of the way, which allowed for much more space to do the work around the fuel tank and the boot floor with the new wheel well. So whilst it's all loose and disconnected from everything, I thought I'll take it out, give it a good looking over. So you can see here I'm just trying to remove some of these fuel fittings. Now I'm going to be brutally honest here, I was on the fence as to whether these were going to come out okay, or if I'm going to shear off some of the welds that were holding these fittings in the tank. But you know, I thought I'd give it a good go. So you can see here I've just got a large adjustable because I don't have the same size socket I need, and I'm just trying to give it some leverage. It's a little awkward because obviously it's a large tank. I can't just stick it in the vise or anything like that. So short of getting on the floor and straddling it, up on the bench and just trying to brace the tank with one arm and the adjustable with the other was the only method I had. But you know, knocking it with a hammer and things wasn't going to loosen it up. So just outside the back door, where I've been doing some DIY work around the house, there's some PVC pipe which seemed to be about the right size. I was a little sceptical as to whether it would hold the stresses of trying to break this free, but lo and behold, it did. And once I got it braced, it did pop. There we go. So they will come undone. So this is actually it's an alloy fitting. So the section here that threads into the tank is made of aluminium, and then there is a steel fitting which then goes inside of that, which brings it down to a different size. Here I've just basically got it taped up. Now mostly that's just because there's a lot of rust debris around, so I didn't want to get, I'm just trying to keep the tank as clean as possible really whilst I'm doing this. So you can see here, you know, now I've broken it loose and the copper seal's free. Let's give it a quick blow just to get all the loose stuff out of the way, and then we can see what we're working with here. So this is the feed side of the tank. As you can see, it draws the fuel through this, which is the in-tank filter, which is just like a major filter for filtering out large debris. It's just popped in there, so rocket free. It's plastic. It's about 32mm, that clamping surface there, where it sits inside. I did have a quick look around online, couldn't find any direct fit replacements or any new old stock parts, so we'll be sticking with this one for now. But you can see the inside of that alloy fitting. It looks in good stead. The tank looks nice and clean inside, so I was pretty happy with that. So with that one out, there's this other fitting. Now this one here is the return. So with the fuel circuit, it's a constant feed, so you have a fuel pump that pressurizes to about 3 bar, I believe, if I remember correctly. I'll fact check this in a later video when I go over the fuel system in a bit more detail. But essentially you have a pump and it's constantly circulating the fuel, kind of like your heart is in your body. It's keeping that fuel pumping around the car and pressurizing the fuel rail, and then the injectors decide exactly how much of that fuel pressure or that pressurized fuel is going to be injected into each cylinder by a injection duration, which is how long the injector is open for. Think of it like just opening a tap into the cylinders. There are different kinds of injection. Again, go into that a bit more depth in another video. But back to this one, you can see this is broken free. I think this is a 16, was it 16 or 17mm spanner in the end. So nice and easy one to get hold of. and this is the banjo joint, which is the union for the return of the fuel to the tank. Because like I mentioned, it's pressurized, so it's constant pressure in the fuel circuit, which is held at that pressure from the end of the pump, the outlet of the pump, up to the fuel pressure regulator on the end of the fuel rail. So that is the pressurized part of the system. Beyond that, you have the return, which is still under pressure, but it's not a regulated pressure. So anything that gets past that regulator, so anything that is pushing the fuel circuit beyond 3 bar, will be allowed past the regulator and returned to the tank, back through this banjo fitting. So you may have noticed that it's sped up somewhat in the background. That's because I was farting about trying to make some sort of fitting to keep that opening closed. Because I've taken the banjo off for measuring, and I just wanted something I can plug in there whilst I'm cleaning up the tank and cleaning it and spraying it, so we get like a nice finish. And I thought electrical tape around a bolt would be a good shout on this one, which it is, but you know, I was farting about for far too long, so I thought I'd speed this up for you. So these surfaces are mating surfaces, so they are there's a copper washer which is sandwiched between the fitting itself and the tank flange. These need to be quite flat, otherwise you're going to get leakages. So all I've got here is some high grain wet and dry, bit of WD-40 in it, and the back side of a chisel, which is nice and flat. It's just nice and easy thing to work with to get a nice flat finish. So you can see here, it's just taking off minimal amounts just to make sure that it's a nice clean fit for when that when the new copper washer goes back on there. I'm going to reuse this fitting because this is not a common size. It's very large. I'm sure it's like an M30 or whatever crazy fitting it is, but short of trying to find that fitting with that thread pitch, I'm going to reuse this one. It's in good order. Yeah, but we will replace the banjo fitting, I think. Just this look in here, you can see some of the baffles that are in the tank. To anyone who's not had any fuel cells or anything like that in the past, fuel tanks generally have baffles in, and this stops the fuel from sloshing from side to side when you're going around corners and front to back when you're accelerating or braking. And that just means that if you haven't got an absolutely brimful tank, the fuel is always going to be around where it's being drawn from in the tank. In this case, it's through that plastic filter that we removed just now. So you can see the tank it's not immaculate, even though it's been in the boot, but then the boot hasn't been watertight for quite some time. So as you can see, it's got quite a bit of attack. This is actually the bottom of the tank because the feed and return are on the bottom. So this is upside down as we look at it here. But it's not in bad order. There's no heavy corrosion. Obviously this is all like pitting, but it's not eaten through to the point where it's wafer thin or anything like that. So I was quite happy with the tank. This is just after a quick wire brush, in case you're wondering. I didn't record that bit because it was between time. You know, I had a bit of a moment to get that done, so I just quickly whizzed over it with a drill and some wire wheel. With these baffles again, it's an interesting and very elaborate shape in there. I'd imagine that there's lots of sheet steel pressed pieces that then spot welded together before they seam weld the tank together, because obviously you're not going to be getting that in through any of the openings here. They're not always this elaborate. Some modern race fuel cells have foam in there instead. So you can see here, I've just put a bit of paper towel in a glove just to seal off that other one, because I didn't have any bolts close enough to that, funny enough. And this is the fuel inlet. So this would mount up to the fuel filler cap in the car. This is the little silicone hose that runs between the two. So, a bit of a closer look here. This is the banjo joint. I'll zoom in. And you can see there's a copper washer on this side of it that makes up with the tank. Then there's the banjo union itself, which is like a hollow donut, which allows the fuel to pass around the outside of the bolt. There's the other copper washer that seals at the top side. and here's the banjo bolt itself. You see there's that opening, and then it's hollow at the top here, or the bottom, whichever way you want to call it. And that allows the fuel to flow through the bolt and out through the fitting. This side of it is what I mentioned is quite unique in its sizings, so we're going to reuse this. So pop that fuel filter off again. You can see this, it looks relatively clean, so it's obviously doing its job. But there we go. So this alloy fitting, aluminium stuff generally looks nice when it's been coated in fuel all this time, so it's going to look like fresh aluminium. It's not had any chance for corrosion where it's been sat. This is the step down, which I think brings it down to an M10, or is it no, M20 I think maybe. I'll confirm these bits for a later video, because I'll show you some of the fittings I'm going to be putting back on the tank. But essentially there's this large union here. It's got a copper washer, just get off here. That is mating with the tank, but there's also, I don't know if you can see it there, there's a O-ring that sits just inside the lip there. So there's a recess specifically for that O-ring. Generally speaking, if I'm going to take anything apart, I'm going to be replacing everything that's rubber. Even stuff that I replaced maybe 7-8 years ago with rubber, I'm going to be changing out all belts and any seals I can get to easily. So there you go, there's the recess and the copper washer. So stick those back on there so I don't lose them. But they will be ordered fresh from sources online, no doubt, because there are plenty. They're cheap, and there's no point trying to reuse something like that when they're so cheap, because there's nothing worse than putting it all back together nice and painted up and have a fuel leak, because fuel is gonna start lifting paint if it's not fully sealed yet. So yeah, so this part I've not shown you yet, but this is on the other side of the tank. This is the top of the tank, and it's the fuel sender unit. So this is what measures how much fuel you've got in the tank itself. So, you know, taking life into my own hands here, because I think I looked it up, and this is like a £100 part now, because it's unique to the car, obviously. So you're looking for new old stock. But yeah, I'll take it apart so you guys can see inside. So this is the fuel sender. So this outer sleeve acts as a kind of a baffle, so it allows the fuel inside and allows this highly buoyant thing. Oops, there we go. Get the tube out. This buoyant thing here to free flow on this spindle, and essentially this is a large potentiometer. So it knows how far down this coiled metal rod it is by the level of resistance that is given electrically. So it can then take that reading and present to you on the dash how much fuel you got in your tank. These old ones, obviously not highly accurate, but you know, they're a good indication. And by the looks of things, it looks fairly fragile, looking at the size of the coiled wire there. So I didn't want to be too abrasive with it, so we'll just give this a little quick clean up, because it's got a spring at the bottom there just to stop impacts from the plastic at the end, and it's just got a little bit of residue, a bit of gum from fuels, no doubt, getting trapped in there. So this, by the way, is just part cleaner in a spray bottle, just a pressurized bottle, so I can jet it at things when I want to clean something without using any abrasion. So here we go, let's clean that bit on the bottom there. As I mentioned, I didn't really want to break this because it's another expense that I don't want to be spending if I can help. But yeah, here we go. It's it seems in good order. There's no broken wires or anything. Seems to be holding together okay, and it's not horrifically gummed up with crap. I'm not sure exactly what the float's made of. I'm sure it's hugely buoyant. It kind of looks like a blown plastic part, so maybe hollow inside. But yeah, all these springs are very light duty, and this floating part is very, very light. So generally speaking, if there's lots of parts that don't weigh anything around, I have to end up being a little bit more careful. It's not like a suspension component where you can bray on it a bit with a hammer, or a bit of leverage. Just trying to be a little cautious with it. Again, with this tube, I don't want to deform this in any way, because if I start to squeeze this or dent it in some way, then that float's not going to free flow down it, and it's going to be pointless to put back in the tank. And I really don't want to have to re-engineer some kind of aftermarket float if I can't get hold of one reasonably. So anyway, give it a quick clean up whilst we were just having a look inside. Looks to be in good order. So let's just try and get this back on here. There's these 3 plastic clips at the top, in case you ever fancy having a look inside yours. This is relatively easy to get to. It is on the top of the tank, although I'm not sure you get it out of the tank without removing the tank, because there's not a lot of room above the tank to then slide it up and out of the tank. I said tank a lot of times there. But yeah, this goes back on. There's these 3 swage clips, which looks a little more perilous than it actually was. And then flush it up and push it down like a big TNT plunger, and it seemed to go back in quite nicely. Like I mentioned, where it's nice and working, or at least it was working, I don't want to mess with it too much. It does have to align here. You see there's actually like a perfect recess for this tube to slot back into in between the plastic spines. So click it back in. It's nice and seated home now, and there we go, my fuel sender unit. So obviously, if we're going to be painting the tank up, I'm going to try and clean all these bits up so they look the nicest. I mean, this car's been around for quite some time now. It's quite an easy bit of maths because it's 1 year younger than me, so it's a 34-year-old car now. So a lot of these parts have been sat there ever since it was new, 34 years. So it's unsurprising they're a bit dirty. You know, I don't feel too bad about the car being rusty, and I think it's been around almost as long as I have. So you know, I'd have a bit of rust, I think, if I'd been motoring all this time, sat in barns and workshops and yards. So yeah, get yourself a toothbrush in case you haven't got one in the garage for cleaning parts up. Very, very useful at getting into the little nooks and crannies, and they're generally pretty hard wearing as well. So there we go. Let's clean up this plastic part, make it look a little less grim. The seal underneath this looks in good order, but you know, as I mentioned, as a rule of thumb, I'll try and replace every bit that's rubber. With this being on the top of the tank, I'm not too concerned. I'd be more worried if it was the compression fittings at the bottom of the tank, because obviously this should just be keeping any vented gases from escaping into the boot and giving you a nice rich fuel tank smell in the cabin. So you know, I'm not going to replace this one because it's quite highly specific. It's shaped specifically for the ridges on the back of the sender and the ridges that are on the tank. It has sort of like a wave pattern around in cross section, which helps create the seal because you get a bit more surface area on the seal itself. It seals up nicely, and the rubber does feel nice and pliable. It's not hardened or anything, so hopefully with this, which sees vapor, it's not weathered so badly. But again, I'm going to reuse this one unless I can find a new one online before I put this tank back in. So here I'm just cleaning up these contacts with a bit of wet and dry, just to take off a bit of the corrosion from the years. I can't find mine, or I did actually go and find it. I've kept it out here, or I went to go and look for it anyway. But some spray contact cleaner, if you've got some of that, use it. It's very, very useful stuff. I think WD make one as well, but you can usually pick up from any kind of car parts place. It's good because it kind of has a kind of like foaming action, which helps lift anything off the contacts and nicely corrodes any dirt off of there, and you're left with nice clean metal for a nice contact with your connector. I think it's either called connector or contact cleaner, but yeah, highly recommend it. Didn't have it here, so I just used a bit of wet and dry and some part cleaner. So this is the fuel filter. I'm just giving it a nice little clean up here, best I can. I mean, this is more of a like a heavy debris filter. It's going to stop all the rust and crap in the tank, should there be any, being lifted up and dropped straight down into the fuel pump itself. Because I think the circuit works. It goes from the tank down through all the fittings, through this filter itself as it comes out the tank, down into the pump itself, and then it goes from the pump into what we would class as your fuel filter for the car, which is like a cylindrical tube under the car, and that filters before it goes down the fuel line to the fuel rail. So this is really just to pick up any large debris and to stop anything else. The fuel filter under the car is more of a consumable part, which you'd replace on service intervals, which I'll be doing when I go to inspect the rest of the fuel system, which is probably going to be either the next video or the one after, because we're working our way around that way, and I'm putting off welding the roof of the car as much as possible. So that's looking okay now. So this is looking a little grim. You can see that adapter there, which I probably won't be using, so I'm not going to focus on cleaning that up too much. So with those bits done, let's clear some space and have a look at this fuel union. So this is the output of the tank fitting again. So this is aluminium, should come up quite nicely. You know, I got these cleaning brushes. Obviously my family know me well. This was a birthday present for assortment of various cleaning brushes for drill attachment. But on a pillar drill, these are brilliant because it gives you so much more control, being able to hold the part with two hands and then bring it up to the pillar drill itself. If I was doing this freehand, the drill would want to be wandering all over the place. It's going to end up getting caught in clothes, flying off on parts, and just generally hopping all over the place. This allows a lot more of a controlled attack. And this is just a nylon brush, so I'm just taking off the worst of it because I don't want to be really attacking those threads too hard. So I want to just go nylon with that. But it didn't really touch a lot of the corrosion on the top there, which has been exposed to the elements and salty roads and things for quite some time. But it seems to be doing a pretty decent job of just the base aluminium, cleaning up those threads, knocking all the dirt out. Looking pretty good. You can see some of the pitting on the external parts, but these threads are pretty nice and decent. So on to the next. This is another part of my my birthday kit. This is the Velcro pack, just with a green abrasive pad, like a scour pad you'd use in the sink or cleaning a bathroom or whatever. This is quite abrasive, so it does take off a lot of the surface stuff, but it doesn't eat into the material particularly. So it was doing a pretty decent job of cleaning up anything that had aluminium oxide corrosion bubbled up on top. So it's a pretty decent step. Again, I'd recommend having the same kit I've got here. If I can find a link, I'll stick it in the description. I'm not one for affiliating things, not unless someone wants to give me some free alpha parts. But yeah, this has been quite a useful tool. You can see it's cleaning up the surface of that, but not eating too much into the head of the bolt there, which is a mating surface. You can see, at least when I turn it around again, you'll see that there's a shiny circular section in the middle there, which is a nice flat section which the copper washer of the fitting sits onto. So yeah, this is just zipping that up. It's looking pretty decent. Again, going to a bit more effort here. And to be honest, this is all just experimenting, seeing what kind of abrasion is going to work best for me in cleaning this up. So I'm starting with softer, working up to harder means of abrasion, just to see what's going to get off what I need off without attacking the aluminium casting of it too much, because it's obviously going to be a nightmare to source one of these again. I'd imagine we're looking at bodging some other kind of plumbing fitting on there if I was to damage this, or if it was no good. But yeah, you can see there, that flat surface is cleaned up lovely, and yeah, the parlour is pretty decent. In hindsight, I'd have probably either stopped here or done a light acid etch to take up that face. But you know, I was on a roll, so I thought, well, whilst we got the pillar drill out, we'll go for something a bit harder. So this is just a wire wheel. So this is they look like brass, but they're not. They're steel coated in brass, I think, or coloured in some way. Maybe they're just, you know, yellow passivate zinc coated steel. I don't know, but this is much coarser mean of abrasion, and I was trying my best not to actually catch the top surface here. I was trying to catch the hex part of the head there, just to clean all that up. You see all the aluminium oxide dust coming off the side there, because it's just grinding it away quite quickly. I was kind of hoping that this would be the last step, if I'm honest, but it didn't clean it up as nicely as I'd like. It did take it back to a relatively clean metal, took a lot of the large chunks and stuff off. And you know, this is what I'd use elsewhere on the car to bring it back to metal before welding, things like that. Unless I was going to be painting, this would probably be the only, this and maybe a sander of some kind. You can see it's coating my welding gloves, old welding gloves I must add, because as I mentioned earlier, my family obviously know me because another little birthday gift was a new set of welding gloves. These ones are nearly shot, if I'm honest. So I'll get the last of my use out of these and onto my nice new fresh set. So this wire wheel's done a pretty decent job. It's taken off all of the corrosion, but it has scored up the surface, which is a little less nice. I mean, this is sitting underneath the car, so you know, most people would be like, "Meh, it's good. It's gonna mate up. Shouldn't leak. Looks pretty tidy on the inside. I'll move on." But no, I thought I'd give it a clean up and continue trying to make it look as nice as possible for some reason. But you know, sometimes you get obsessed and taken away by this sort of stuff, even though there's probably other stuff I could be doing to get the car a little closer to the road faster. But you know, I want to enjoy this process as well. But you can see there that the flat that the copper sits on is nice and shiny flat surface, which is going to help me out when it comes to sealing this back up when we're putting fuel fittings on there. But yeah, it's looking pretty good, like a nice bit of aluminium. But as I mentioned, can't help myself, so bit of sanding block, just to try and take out some of those deep scratches, and just highlight some of the lettering and stuff that's been pressed into it. It's kind of looking pretty decent, and this is me just making sure that it's nice and flat on top. Again, I sped all this up because you know, you don't need to be watching this stuff over and over again. This is already quite a long video, and the 15-minute videos went out the window quite some time ago. So I just, yeah, they're as long as they take. This is the tank. I've just gone over this with a green scour on a drill, the same one you saw in the pillar drill, except for on a hand drill. This is to key up all the paint, so that when I go to paint it with primer, it's going to stick and adhere and not just flake off. So yeah, you can see these worst parts here, which taken all the loose rust off, because the next step of this is to use the FE123 rust converter. So it says shake well, so give that a good shake. because this is going to be sealing up all of the rust that's exposed on the tank. This is in preparation so that I can put a nice seal on it, which we're going to be doing a little later. But yeah, this is the first step. This is just to seal the tank so that the rust isn't going to keep spreading. So this is going to convert that rust back to you know, the base metal. So seal that off. Don't need a lot. This is the cheapest brush I could find because I seem to be getting through tons and tons of these small, like 1 centimeter, 12mm brushes, because they're great for doing stuff like this. But you get something like an epoxy mastic on it, or use it for seam sealer or anything like that, it's ruined. You're not going to see that brush again in daily use. You're not going to get it out and do some emulsion cutting in your house. So a lot of the time they don't even get cleaned, they go in the bin, which is pretty wasteful, but they are like a block afterwards, unless you happen to have some decent thinners to really eat it back. So obviously sped this up a little again because this is quite time consuming. The guidance is to not overlap the paintwork too much, but to get a good coverage on all of the metal. So that was the important part for me. Again, this is the bottom of the tank, so I'm just going over everywhere that there is a little bit of rust, and it does seem to spread a little bit as I find new patches here and there. I do have a lamp just off to the side. You can see some shadows cast. This is just to give me a bit more visibility, because this is the lighting is above me in my garage, which is pretty bright, but where it's all down lighting, you do end up with shadows and some weird bits that you don't see. Also, where the paint work was black, and I've keyed it all up, it does seem to just show, just seem to hide the rust quite nicely where it's all quite dark. But yeah, this is all working around the tank. So this stuff you paint on, and I think I'm not sure the exact timings of it, but in my experience, within the hour or so, you're down to a point where it's almost entirely dry. In UK climate, so sort of like low 20s, and this was painted in, you know, it seems to come up quite nicely. I always put it in a jar like I have done here, because it holds well. As long as it's not exposed to the air, it doesn't go off. So I just seal it off, and then the brush itself, because this is water based, you can rinse that out, and then you're back to fight another day with it. Again, it's not like a paint finishing brush, so it's pretty cheap. That was like a £1 job from Halfords, I think. So these are all auxiliary bits for the fuel tank. So these are the feet that it sits on. These go between the tank and the boot floor. I assume to take out some of the shock and noise from the resonance of the tank. There should be one more. I think it's still under the car, but you know, if I can't find another one, I'll have to source something similar. These two sit on the top of the tank where the strap goes over, and I guess again stops rattling between the strap and the tanks, or scratching them or damaging them. This is just, looks like recycled fabrics. There's a pinch. I'm sure I could remake something a little bit more nice looking than that. A bit of old leather or something, and some padding, but that's what we've got at the moment. And this sits underneath the tank, and sandwiches between the very bottom of the fuel tank and the boot floor, where there's a recess, like a hole cut for the fuel feed and return. So this is the feed. So this here sits in the tank, up like that, and the underside of the tank has that on it. And then that's where you'd thread underneath the car. And then the other side has the banjo bolt here, which has the return feed attached to it. You can see this is obviously the tank side. This is a mixture of the paint that was on the tank and a layer of rust that's come away with it. So this is why we need to make sure the tank's nice and sealed up on that side, so that when it's back in there, we don't get any more rusting. I could potentially reuse this. I mean, it's obviously made to size, but at the end of the day, it's just a bit of foam. So I could just use this as a template and make a new one, I think. It'd be nice if it was something hydrophobic,
This is relatively, but I think that probably just holds the moisture looking at the way it's built. It has that kind of like fibrous texture to it. I'm sure I could find something, but this is what we got that came off the car. So I'll show you this whilst I'm pecking away the residue of the paint and the adhesive that was holding it on. Yeah, on to the next things. Currently just got the FE123 rust converter working its magic on the tank, at least on the bottom side of it, and then I'll flip it over and do any of the spots that need doing the other side.
So, as if by magic, here is some rust converted tank. So you see these little blue bits, that's where it's just a little bit wet still, a little bit tacky, but for the most part this is dry. It's not going to be running anything. I'm pretty content. This is quite a hardened finish it leaves. It's almost similar to like a nail varnish or a, you know, a really strong acrylic paint. It feels hard to the finish, almost like a glass or a plastic epoxy sort of finish. So you know, it's quite hardened. So take the fuel sender out because I know there's a little bit of corrosion around where that seals up. So we're going to go and attack that as well. So let's put that out of the way for safekeeping. And with this being the underside of the tank, sorry, this is the top side of the tank now, underside is done. Give that a little bit of a mix just to make sure that's mixed in again, because you get a separation and then you emulsify it, which is when you mix in the oily part with the watery part and then paint it on. So this side has lots of sort of light corrosion around, so obviously there's quite a lot to paint on this side, but you know, it soon disappears. I've sped this up because it's painful to watch me do it, of course. But this is essentially just getting the seal on here, ready for a layer of a decent epoxy primer, so that hopefully once this is sealed up it can stay this shape and this form for quite some time before anyone needs to look at it again. So this is nice and buttoned up. If it's not doing the tank any good, it makes me feel a bit better that I'm at least trying to do something preventative.